Hi, so welcome to another Facebook Live about the inner critic. So this is part of a series of lives that I've been making recently, and it's all about kind of getting to know the mechanisms within our psychology that create shame and learning some tools so we can be free of that, so that we can be more naturally confident. So if you're enjoying these lives, please remember to click the button to join my page. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about responding to a question that someone asked about, well, what happens if we've got people around us who are actually critical? So a lot of focus so far in the lives I've done has been on the internal criticism that goes on inside that we're not usually aware of. But for sure, we might find that there are people around us who are actually criticizing us, actually making judgments about us. So what then? It's a great question. So there are important things about communication and about setting boundaries. But the most important thing, at least in my experience, is doing the internal work. So when you do the internal work, like we've talked about so far, building an awareness of the critic, learning to disengage, then it has a dramatic effect on how external judgment that we receive from others lands. So there can be this experience that someone is making judgments about us, and we can hear them, but it doesn't land in us in a way that sends us into a spiral of shame and is difficult and painful. And I think a lot of you may have experienced this to some extent already. Often if someone is making a judgment about something that doesn't fit with your own inner critic, you kind of know that that isn't true about you, then it doesn't land. It kind of brushes off like water off a duck's back, and it doesn't have an effect. But those criticisms that actually fit, that kind of land, that resonate with what your own critic is criticizing you for, those are the ones that hurt. Those are the ones that can send me into a reaction. And so by doing the internal work, by not having so much internal criticism, it allows more of those judgments from the external world to kind of brush past us. And I think that what often happens is that there'll be something quite small. There can be just a word someone says, or maybe something little they do, and it's what we do with it. We kind of take it inside, we kind of stew on it, and then we criticize ourselves. And then we can think, oh well, they're being very critical of me. It's obvious that because of this. And sometimes they are being like that, but often that's not the main thing that's happening. And I remember, for me, one particular relationship where this was quite strong is with a boss of mine, and we would have our meetings, and she would talk a lot about performance, about like where we were getting to in the projects, and I would receive that very often as judgment about my performance and how I was doing. So within the meetings and after the meetings, I'd have quite strong emotional reactions, and I experienced her as very judgmental. But that's a big part of that is my response to it. So there's something within her that kind of reminded me of something that I'd experienced earlier in my life, like the way that she was. And that was sending me into a kind of memory. It was sending me into this dynamic with myself where I'm criticizing me. And if we're able to own that, which I didn't do particularly well back then that really reduces the conflict with that person. We can see that they're making judgments, but our reaction is something different. That's actually ours. That's something that reminds us of something painful. Remembering that this internal criticism, it's actually an imprint, it's a memory. It's something that we learn early in our life. And I think that particularly in relationships, intimate relationships, or when you're spending a lot of time with someone, if you live with someone, it's really important to have this kind of understanding that we will get triggered emotionally into reactions. So we'll get triggered into kind of memories. There's stuff that will touch us in our relating that will take us right back there to those moments that were challenging for us when we were very young. And I'm pretty sure this is true for everyone. It's true for me, and I haven't met anyone who it isn't true for. But having that understanding within relationships is really important, because then if my partner becomes triggered, then I can listen and I can hear, because there may be things that they're sharing that are actually really important. But the judgment, because it's very likely when people have emotional reactions that they're going to make some judgments, make other people wrong in some way. So the judgments that they're throwing at me and the emotional reaction, I kind of know it doesn't really belong to me. If there's a reaction happening, then there's something that they've experienced that they're kind of showing me. They're revealing, this really hurts. But it's not to do with me. It's not like I'm wrong. And of course that takes a decoupling from my own inner critic. And similarly, if I'm in reaction, if I'm emotionally triggered and I'm making judgments about them, any time that I'm making my partner wrong, that means that there's something that I'm struggling with. So the ability to own that and know that it's not about them. There may be things I need to communicate, but it's really important to know that if there's a reaction, if there's judgment happening, there's things that I'm struggling with. And that's something to do with my past. So the other thing that I think is really important, because this is one piece of it, the other really important thing is around boundaries. And being able to say, no, that's enough. And we need that. We need to be able to press the pause button. So if our partner is just kind of letting off steam and dumping on us, to be able to say, look, I can't hear you right now. I'm kind of full. I need to take some space right now. So you can kind of step out and breathe and kind of calm down. And then that lets them calm down as well. So being able to say no is really important. And the ultimate of that is being able to actually say no to relationships. That if a relationship is really toxic, if you're receiving continual judgment and you're just not being treated well, to have the empowerment to be able to say, I'm going to leave. I value myself enough to not put myself in that situation. So again, value is really tied up with this inner critic, and being able to say no as well, like realizing that you value yourself enough to say no and step back. And something that can happen, and I've got a lot of experience with this, is that if you're not really able to do that, you can find that somehow you find yourself surrounded by a lot of judgment in your life. People who are actually judging from the external. And I've certainly experienced that for myself. And in particular, we can find ourselves attracted to people who are judgmental. And it kind of feels like a good fit. And this is because it kind of resonates, it kind of fits. If we've had if we've had a childhood where we've been judged and criticized a lot, when we meet someone who's doing that, it's like, that's a great fit, perfect. And it feels like we've kind of met our soulmate. So as I say, this is something that I've done, and it doesn't end too well. There's kind of usually a period of brief relief, because your own inner critic doesn't need to work so hard because you're receiving it from your partner. But then it's not a good way to be in relationship. So it can be very stressful. The nervous system becomes very agitated. So, and that's something that I'm actually going to talk about in the next live, I think, because that's a really important element to this criticism. It sends us into a state of being emotionally triggered, and part of that is the effect of our nervous system. So I think that's all I have to share about that question. And the keys to it are, the main key is doing the internal work. I think it makes a huge difference. It's kind of like magic. I mean, that's what I experienced with it. It just seems like the external judgment just dies away as we do the internal work. So that's the most important key. And then to also be able to set boundaries is really important. And obviously that's a lot of what our workshops are about as well, being able to set those boundaries and find out the way to move and be in our lives that really honours us, as well as honouring the person that we're relating with. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and if you did, please share it. And I will be back with another Facebook Live, and the next one's all going to be about the nervous system